Today's service and sermon touches upon our sixth principle, which is outlined in the back of your order of service, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. When I visited this congregation back in May, I taught you a song, and I'm sure you all remember it. I'm going to lead and I'll sing it 2 or 3 times and join in as you feel comfortable. My wife knows it, so she'll be singing loudly as well. Our community flowing with freedom, personal liberty shared. Peace is much more than the absence of violence. It is the presence of justice. Our community flowing with freedom, personal liberty shared. Peace is much more than the absence of violence. It is the presence of justice. Our community flowing with freedom, personal liberty shared. Peace is much more than the absence of violence. It is the presence of justice. The recent worship schedule has kept me out of the pulpit for 2 weeks. And I stand here before you today just reminded of how fortunate I feel to be preaching to such a great group. Shortly after I arrived in North Carolina, I signed a petition against capital punishment. And I received a letter from one of North Carolina's senators who wrote, "The death penalty is a just punishment, a needed deterrent and a means to protect society from further violence by the offender. Furthermore, both Judaism and Christianity have traditionally acknowledged the authority of the state to impose capital punishment for serious crimes." On one point, I agree with him. Throughout the Bible, capital punishment is offered. The first mention of capital punishment as a penalty for murder is in Genesis 9:6. "Whoso sheddeth a man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man." And Exodus 21:12 reads, "He that smiteth a man so he shall die, shall surely be put to death." And there are other verses in the Bible that repeat this thought. Murder is a serious crime. Exodus 21:15 continues, "He that smiteth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death." And yes, killing your parents is even worse. Continues, "And he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death." And I guess this covers kidnapping and slavery. "And he that curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death." I think my son is in trouble. And maybe half of you here. And there's lots of rules about things that can put you to death. Like if your ox is a repeat offender in goring people, both you and the ox should be stoned. Exodus 22:9, bestiality is a capital crime. Exodus 31:14, "Ye shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Every one that defileth shall surely be put to death." Well, that ought to keep attendance up. "And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death." Lets women off the hook that are adulterers, but That's part of the patriarchal baggage. Incest is punishable by death. Male homosexuality, they don't mention female homosexuality. Sexual activity with a woman who's menstruating will have you cut off from your people. A man or woman who is a medium or a spiritist among you must be put to death. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Gee, and the Path of the Moon group's being so nice to us today. Anyone who blasphemes in the name of the Lord must be put to death. The entire assembly must stone him. If anyone other than the priest set up the tabernacle, they shall be put to death. I'd like to thank the Sunday service coordinators who set up the altar this morning. Please turn yourself into the police after the service. Deuteronomy 17:16 and 2 Chronicles 15:13 says that anyone who worships other gods shall be put to death. I mean, executing all those Hindus is going to be a lot of work. Maybe that's why nuclear weapons were invented. In Deuteronomy 21:20, an interesting parenting solution. Bring your child to the gate and say, "This is our son, stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And the men of the city shall stone him with stones that he die." Gluttony and alcoholism are capital crimes according to the Bible. Ezekiel 18:10 has a whole list of capital crimes. A son that is a robber, a shedder of blood, and doeth like any of these things, and doeth not any of those duties, but hath even eaten upon the mountains, and defiled his neighbor's wife, has oppressed the poor and the needy, has spoiled by violence, has not restored the pledge, has lifted upon his eyes to idols, have committed abomination, has given forth upon usury, and has taken increase. Shall he then live? He shall not live. He hath done all these abominations. He shall surely die. His blood shall be upon him. Besides the usual murder and adultery and blasphemy, Ezekiel includes other things that make him sound like a Marxist revolutionary. Death to the oppressor, death to bankers who lend money at interest. If your checking account gives you 2% interest, does that mean you are guilty of a capital crime? Think about how cruel and awful this country would be if we actually followed the Bible. If someone tells you that they believe in capital punishment because it's in the Bible, ask them if they're willing to follow the Bible completely. There's a belief in Christianity that death can be redemptive. New York State Senator James Donovan, speaking in support of capital punishment, said, "Where would Christianity be if Jesus got 8 to 15 years with time off for good behavior?" The dominant religious symbol in our society is the cross, a symbol of capital punishment, the death of an innocent man somehow paying for the sins of the world, except for the sins of those who we deem guilty. They must pay the debt themselves. There's a cultural belief that execution makes the sin go away. But even after the murderer is killed, the murder victim remains dead. There is no resurrection. There may be vengeance, but is there justice? But in murder cases, at least there is symmetry. A principle of reciprocity applies. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. In this, there is an element of fairness. You get what you have been given. You reap what you have sown. As you have done unto others, so shall be done unto you. But I've also heard it said that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth will leave us toothless and blind. Life for life makes execution the solution for murder. Killing becomes the solution for killing. The executor of justice becomes a participant in the act that is abhorrent. We are a government of the people, and by the people, and for the people. When the state kills a murderer, we are accomplices in that killing. I suggest that the law for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in the Bible, and I'm not alone in this interpretation, is really a law governing vengeance, not justice. The biblical injunction does not promote justice as much as to limit vengeance, because it limits it to an eye for an eye and a life for a life. It was trying to prevent people to say, since you killed a member of my family, I now get to kill your whole family. But I think we need to move away from vengeance because it is never satisfied. If someone kills 10 people, we can never make the murderer pay the price of the crime. The killer only has one life to give. You can execute someone only once. I can't imagine a judge saying, I sentence you to death by lethal injection while sitting in the electric chair in the gas chamber, after which you will be hung and shot. And one can never repay the victim and their family. There is no way to compensate for the loss of human life. Anger is a natural response to losing someone, but I doubt if having another killed soothes that anger. But the one thing that capital punishment does well is that it prevents the killer from killing again. One could argue that execution, in some cases, is a preventative step. A life sentence of a murderer could put other prisoners in that prison in danger. But if you apply this standard, you are killing a person to prevent crimes they have yet to commit. The Roman Catholic Church believes that all life is sacred, and thus no steps should be taken to prematurely end life. They apply this standard consistently from the point of conception. Thus they are against abortion, euthanasia, and the death penalty, believing that humans should not usurp the hand of God. This is more consistent than those who are anti-abortion and pro-death penalty. Robin Williams compares them to bass fishermen. Let's not kill this one while it's small. Let's throw it back and wait till it's bigger later. But in fairness to people who hold this view, they usually make the distinction between innocent life and guilty persons. The difficulty with this position is that the powerful usually decide that the powerless are guilty. The poor and minorities are disproportionately executed. I doubt it is humanly possible to be 100% accurate in determining guilt. DNA technology has removed several prisoners from death row. It is likely that we have already killed innocent people. Some people are wanting to limit the appeals people on death row can make. They are afraid to find out if someone is innocent. They'd rather remain ignorant than discover that innocent people have died. With the current state of our justice system, I believe it's too risky to continue the death penalty. The majority of Unitarian Universalists want legal abortion and an end to capital punishment. This is inconsistent according to the pro-life standard of the Roman Catholic Church, and it's inconsistent to the conservative Protestant standard of protecting the innocent and condemning the guilty. But it's consistent along the standard of choice. A pregnant woman or a dying woman may have the choice to do what she wants with her own body. But in capital punishment, the decision is made by the state. Even if a woman violates the right to life of another person, do we want to empower the state to remove her right to life? I've outlined 4 principles by which people determine their feelings towards the death penalty. The first was reciprocity. People deserve done to them whatever they did. Second is the pro-life position that all life, unconditionally, shall be preserved. Thirdly is the moral argument that all evil must be punished. And fourthly, choice, that a person never loses their right to self-determination and self-preservation. Which of these holds sway in your mind? Can you understand the moral authority of the other positions, even when you disagree with them? Because whichever value you have, you need to be able to answer the objections of those who hold other values. Is it fair to the victim's family that their loved one is dead and the killer lives? I have to admit that is not fair. I hope I never feel the anguish that some of these people feel. If I'm ever in their situation, I hope I'll be able to recognize the humanity of the killer and not demand blood for blood. But it would be callous for me to coerce victims and their families into being forgiving. Yet I would caution them that retribution probably will not bring peace, and that they will still need to cope with the unchanging loss of their loved one. In the pro-life camp, does the state have the right to kill anyone? And in a personal level, should we subject ourselves to death rather than kill an enemy? Does a pro-life position leave us vulnerable to violent tyrants? Yes, it is risky. Yet I think that nonviolent resistance is more likely to break the chain of violence than continuing to kill. And thus, in the long run, we might be building a safer society. And self-defense is a viable expression of your self-determination, even if it results in someone else's death. Some will argue that the punishment must fit the crime. I'd argue that our job is to protect people from the violent elements of our society. Life in prison accomplishes that. We should not play God. If there is a God, then ultimate judgment is his or her concern and not ours. The issue is so large that we're unable to address all the complexities here this morning. I have not even spoke of deterrence. My personal feelings that I doubt that it really causes a deterrent, and from what I read, it seems unlikely. But if it does that change our choices? If killing one person prevents 10 from murdering, does that make it morally defensible? I've only touched briefly on the racism and classism of the current system. If those issues were solved, would the death penalty be a more just option? Or is letting the rich live while killing the poor the point of the whole system? Writing the rules to justify positions of power, are the executed just modern-day scapegoats that comfort the self-righteous? What other issues color our thinking? I'm firmly against the death penalty on the grounds that self-preservation is an inalienable right and cannot be violated, even in punishing those who violate it. But I am certain there are those here in the congregation who support the death penalty, maybe for reasons I have yet to consider. And there are probably those who are against the death penalty for reasons different than mine. The beauty of our faith is that we listen to each other. And I invite you to come forward and speak now about your thoughts on this issue and help us in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Please come to the mic as you feel able.